On the 25th of November 1120, the course of English history changed forever. The King of England at that time was Henry I. Despite having an endless supply of illegitimate children, Henry had only produced two legitimate children with his queen, Matilda of Scotland, and only one of these was a boy named William, meaning the king had only one child who would be considered a realistic option to be his heir. With Queen Matilda now dead, should anything happen to young William, Henry would be presented with an enormous problem when it came to the succession. On the continent, Henry had been at odds with the King of France, Louis VI the Fat, for a number of years, with the King of England defeating Louis at the Battle of Bremille in 1119. Peace was eventually restored between the English and French crowns when Louis accepted William, paying homage to him for the Duchy of Normandy. Although William was his one and only male heir, Henry would have been reassured by the fact that the future of Normandy had been secured, and that William had, at the very least, moved beyond the grave perils of early childhood. William was also now married to Matilda, the daughter of Count Fulk of Anjou. The king could not possibly have foreseen the disastrous incident that would, quite literally, sink his plans for the future. With matters sorted to his satisfaction on the continent, Henry now turned his eye back towards England, preparing to sail across the Channel on that cold winter's night. The journey of the king was smooth and went without incident. However, the heir to the English throne was not on board with his father. William and countless other young nobles were to travel separately on a vessel called the White Ship. The chronicler William of Malmesbury says that this decision was taken by William rather than the king, with Henry happy enough to indulge his son's wishes. The other young nobles flocked to William's side, viewing the prospect of travelling with him as a much more exciting prospect than sailing with the older, duller, but wiser courtiers surrounding the king on the other vessel. As Henry's ship sailed off into the distance, the White Ship remained firmly anchored at Barfleur harbour. Cups overflowed with wine, the night air rang with laughter as those on board threw an enormous party. Alongside young William included two of his half siblings, Richard and Matilda, two of Henry's 24 illegitimate children who would also perish on that fateful night. As they became increasingly intoxicated, the ship's crew began to boast of the magnificent build of the White Ship, and that, if they should set sail now, despite lagging far behind, they would soon overtake the king's own vessel. There were more sober heads on board who recognized the obvious danger of these drunken, youthful boasts. One of these belonged to Count Stephen of Blois, who chose to disembark and wait for a more sensible crew to take him across to England. Stephen cited an upset stomach as his excuse to leave the party, no doubt to a good deal of jeering and mockery. Nonetheless, it was a sensible decision, and indirectly, Stephen would benefit from the tragic events of that night when he stole the English crown in 1135 from under the nose of William's sister, the Empress Matilda, who was not to be confused with the other Matilda who drowned during the sinking. So it was that Captain Thomas Fitzstephen launched the White Ship into action and into open competition to see who would make it to England first. King Henry or young William and his drunken friends. Almost immediately, the White Ship, in the dark of night, ran into fatal trouble as it crashed into a rock still in Barfleur's harbour. As soon as the ship hit the rock with a terrible crash, the hilarity of the night turned into a sober, grim reality of survival. The ship's crew ran on deck and with their hooks began to desperately try and free the ship from its terrible peril. However, try as they might, it would not budge, and some of the crew were swept overboard, whilst others were drowned virtually where they had stood, laughing only moments before. If they could not save the vessel, the crew's new priority was now to preserve the life of William, the heir to the throne. A lifeboat was launched, which William climbed into, and his life, in all likelihood, would have been spared, as the shore was still close at hand. However, in the freezing night air, William heard the cries of his half sister, Matilda, trapped still on the white ship, desperately pleading with William to come rescue her. An heir to the throne may have been expected to act in self preservation in circumstances such as these, but young noble William ordered his lifeboat to be turned about in order to rescue Matilda. However, this one brave decision sealed William's own fate. As the white ship slowly began its descent to the bottom of the sea, desperate young men and women tried to jump, climb, or scramble into the lifeboat, causing it to capsize and sink without a trace. William of Malmesbury calls the sinking a dismal catastrophe and says that no ship had ever brought so much misery to England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicles mournfully reports that few of the bodies were recovered from the wreckage. Only one man, a simple butcher seeking payment, and an unwilling passenger had survived the disaster by clinging on for dear life to the mast. When news was brought to him of the sinking, Henry I was absolutely devastated. Everything he had worked for since the days of when he was the youngest and powerless son of William the Conqueror seemed to have vanished before his eyes. Henry could not mourn William forever, however. He must now, despite being in his 50s, try and produce another son. When this failed, it would be to his daughter, the Empress Matilda, that he would turn. And that, of course, is a story for another day.